Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to go back to April during the budget discussion in which Minister of Finance, Minister Shaw, indicated the debt issue or the debt in the context of Jamaica is an albatross that hangs around the neck of every Jamaican citizen. And in that context, I would like to make 3 or 4 points. One is, how do we place debt, or I would turn it around. How do we place development at the center of the debt debate in Jamaica, so that at the end of the day, we do not talk about only how do we service the debt, but how do we serve the people? And that's my first point. The second point I would talk about is, whenever we talked about debt burden, debt overhang, we heard about the issue of moral hazard. I think for some of you who are not familiar with the term, moral hazard refers to the type of risk that the person will take if he or she knows that eventually he or she will be bailed out eventually by someone else. That argument was turned on its head in the context of the debt relief in the 80s in Latin America, as well as in the context of the highly indebted poor country debt relief initiatives, the HIPIC in Africa. And in fact, if there is a moral hazard issue, and if there's any moral issue to be speak of, HIPIC was supported by a coalition of churches, and as CaPRI refers to, it was called the Jubilee 2000. The third point I would mention is, what can UNDP contribute in the context of the debt issue in Jamaica? We have extended in our discussion with government that we will be willing to support any follow-up actions on the debt sustainability analysis that is currently being undertaken by the government. The idea of having a debt sustainability analysis is to calibrate the capacity of carrying your debt while balancing the needs for growth and development. And that's a very critical point. And the idea of the moral hazard is that most of the countries, or not all of the countries that are indebted, are not asking for a write-off or cancellation. What we are asking for is some fiscal space so that we can balance our obligations in terms of the debt, but also in our obligations for our development and social growth. Second thing that UNDP has tabled is our support to undertake a series of public expenditure reviews, especially in the health and education sector, so that the findings of those reviews could inform the budget debate, so that once we can calibrate what we can afford to pay on the debt service, then we do have an informed basis to guide the allocation or reallocation of our budget toward the social services. In this context, we also have suggested, given the debt composition of Jamaica, which is very much high on the domestic creditors, that perhaps we could bring the domestic creditors around the table, and I would call that the Kingston Club, to contrast it with the Paris Club, where debtor would go when they have to discuss about sovereign debt, or the London Club when we talked about commercial debt. Last thing that we would like to table for support is a national or a regional advocacy platform for debt relief for middle-income countries. Because I think whereas there has been a large attention focused on developing countries, I think we're missing very much the issue or the struggle of middle-income countries with a high debt overhang. Let me conclude by saying that, going back to the question of moral hazard, and I would say that there is a hazard, and there is a national hazard, if we let the debt become an impediment to development. Thank you.
Well, without further ado, I think I'll just go into the report that we came here to see. Now, tonight we'll present this debt report. I want to give some background in the fact that this debt report was actually released, completed the week before the budget debate and presented to policymakers that week so that some of the thoughts and findings could influence that debate. After that, we got fairly caught up in a lot of other debt consultations happening both here and internationally. And so it's at this time we've decided to present the debt report here because a number of other developments have happened. One, this whole discussion about debt relief for middle-income countries. I see representation from the Association of FinSac Entrepreneurs, etc. So felt that this was the time to have this debate. I've broken up the report into 3 parts. How this happened, why debt is important, and how we can fix it. Now, CaPRI doesn't say that we have all the answers, but we did run some scenarios and we have clues as to what we think will work. Here we have our public debt levels from 1995 to 2006. Now, in 1996, we were 76% the debt GDP ratio. We choose to look at that ratio because if you apply that case to the ordinary person, if you owe $1 million and you only earn $200,000, you have a problem. If you owe $1 million and you earn $5 million, it's not a problem. And so it's the same thing with regards to countries. How much do we earn, i.e. our GDP, and how much do we owe debt? We were at 76% debt GDP ratio in 1996. By 2003, we were at 147%, an increase of 71% in 7 years. How did this happen? How did we get here? Well, this was what our debt growth each year in that period looked like, with the killer being in 2001 with 22.4% alone increase in that year. And this is us breaking down that 71, that's breaking down the 71% debt. Now, it's one thing to talk about debt, but there are a lot of different kinds of debt. We know that you can owe a loan shark, you can owe a credit union, you can owe a bank, and these all have different implications in terms of the time period that you owe this money for and when you have to repay it. So we also realized that we had to look and see what kind of debt does Jamaica actually owe. Now, our debt is broken up into 2 parts, showing us that one, the debt that we had previously keeps affecting us because of revaluation, etc. And then the new debt that we add each year. Now, there are a number of categories there, but the one that we should watch is that Jamaica has a basic balance, and that's what a lot of us don't understand. What central government spends on programs and wages is less than we actually collect in tax revenue, and has been that way at least since 1996. But yet we're still indebted when technically we have a primary surplus.